Hey everyone, I'm going to try something new. I hope you can hear it okay and I hope it works out well. But sometimes I have a hard time expressing myself on writing, so I thought maybe I would try doing a video blog today with something that just really has touched my heart as of late, a story in the Bible. It's found in 2 Kings chapter 5. And I came across this and I've shared it with some of you guys. But it's like when we're in Sunday school, over little kids, and we learn these stories. Sometimes a story ends in the middle, and we hear these stories and we're like, oh wow, that's pretty cool, but we don't see the end result of it. And so that's kind of what I want to talk to you a little bit about, because I think there's some awesome things we find in Old Testament stories when we read the whole story and we find out what it's really about. So we're just going to go through this really quick, and I hope you study it yourself, and I hope you find out some things as well that will help you on your path as you walk closer to God and as you learn things, as we learn to walk together. Anyway, it's in the 2 Kings 5, and it says this. The first verse says, Naaman, commander of an army for the king of Aram, was a great man in his master's sight and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was a brave warrior, but he had a skin disease. Very interesting to me that when we stop here and look at this, God was using a nation and a warrior and a king that were not following him. And so you have all these things taking place here, but the Lord was using it, and the writer of 2 Kings makes sure that the Lord was using him, that we would know that. And they said he had a skin disease. Now this word in the original language of Hebrew is much more than just leprosy. A lot of us would learn that you just say it was leprosy, but there's a lot more to that. But he had this disease, and obviously it wasn't harmful enough to him at this point for him to not be able to go out to battle. So we'll pick up in 2. It says, Amram had gone on raids and brought back from the land of Israel a young girl who served Nahum's wife. In verse 3, she said to her mistress, if only my master would go to the prophet whom is in Samaria, he will cure him from a skin disease. Now, this is a pretty awesome thing to think about too. Here is this young lady who has been captured, who has been harmed, if you would, taken away from her family and her nation. And it doesn't seem like she is bitter about it. It's like she's accepted what the Lord has given her, this negative thing that we would see, and that she's making the best of her situation. Because why would she say, my master, if only? I mean, she wanted him to be healed. And so we see this girl, and she's doing that, and they need to go to this prophet in Samaria. So Nahum went and told his master what the girl said. And in verse 5 it says, therefore the king of Aram said, go, and I will send a letter with you to the king of Israel. And so the king is like, well, I want you healed. You're my best commander. I want you to go out there. So here, take this with you. Take these gifts with you, and take a letter with you, and go and find this healing that you're looking for. Well, that was going on. And so when he went, this is what he took with him: 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, 10 changes of clothes. And he brought this letter to the king of Israel. And this is what the letter read. You'll find this in 6. It says, when the letter came to you, when this letter comes to you, note that I have sent you my servant Nahum for you to cure him of skin disease. Now it's very interesting, because that's not why he was going to see the king. But king to king, it looks like that what was happening is that the king of Aram was handling it like he would want it handled for him. And so he writes this letter, and he sends us with him. An interesting response here in verse 7. When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes. I mean, he was mourning, and this is why. He asked this. Now, understand that the messenger or the commander was not standing here. Nahum wasn't standing in front of him. Probably he was off in another room waiting for a response for the king to even see if he could get an audience. And so he says he tore his clothes. In other words, he's talking to his advisors. He's talking to himself. He says, am I God, killing and giving life, that this man expects me to cure him from a skin disease? Think it over, and you will see that he is only trying to pick a fight with me. He's looking at this with the wrong direction. He's saying, hey, look, this guy's just wanting to pick a fight with me because I can't cure him. I'm not God. And this goes about the town, it seems like, and this buzz, the king tore his clothes, which is a sign of mourning and a very big distress. And, oh, okay, well, the king is doing this. And we find that word gets to Elisha in verse 8. And Elisha, I'm surprised it's not, obviously that there's this distance between the prophet and the king. You have to understand, in God's, when God allowed the Israelites to have a king, he also sent prophets with them. and it was supposed to be a dual kind of reign. It was supposed to be the king was handling all the things of the nation, and then the prophet was there to guide them spiritually. Well, we find that a lot of times in Old Testament stories that the king and the prophet didn't see eye to eye a lot of times, and there was this rift. But so we find that Elisha is not in the palace, is not around the king, probably where he should have been, and he sends a message to the king. He goes, verse 8 and 9. He says, "Why have you torn your clothes? Have him come to me, and he will know there is a prophet in Israel." He said, "King, why are you worried about this? Send him to me. This is my part of the job." And so Nahum came with his horse and his chariot, and he stood at the door of Elijah's house. Now this is interesting because Elisha doesn't even come out to see Nahum. He sends a messenger, you know. The first response to me was like, wow, he doesn't want the skin disease either, and so he's just going to go ahead and stand and send the messenger. But he sent a message to him and said, "Go wash 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be clean." Interesting. He comes in and he says, okay, go to the Jordan and wash 7 times. 7 being the perfect number, God's number. 7 also being, a lot of times with diseases in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, you had a 7-day quarantine, and so that may have been something to do that the 7 times was taking place of the 7-day quarantine. We don't know that for sure, but it seems very, very reasonable. Nahum had a response to this. He actually gets angry. It says, "But Nahum got angry and left, saying, I was telling myself, he will surely come out and stand and call on the name of Yahweh, his God, and will wave his hand over the spot and cure the skin disease." And he says, and I'm going to mess up these rivers, but there's 2 rivers in Damascus. He says, "Aren't the 2 rivers of Damascus better than all the waters in Israel? Could I wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and he left in a rage. This shows the heart of Nahum. He didn't want a ritual cleaning. He wanted a true cleaning, a true restoration. He wanted something that would have shown that this God of Yahweh, or of Israel, Yahweh, was the God that has power over all these things. And so he was really angry. I mean, he was upset. He was like, "I don't get this." He goes, "Why isn't he coming and he's talking to me?" But here's his servants approached him and said to him, and just real quick, how many times do we do that with God? God gives us something, but it doesn't go the way we think that it should go, and then we get angry. I mean, I've been there. I've done that. God, we're having an issue. We're praying to God, and God says, "Well, I want you to go make this simple step." Maybe it's just, you know what? I know you haven't done anything wrong, but you need to go ask forgiveness for somebody, and it's a simple thing to do, and yet we get angry. I'm not going to do that, and we get all upset. And that's kind of what happened. But his servants, the people who were close to him, approached him and said this. This is verse 13. "My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you have not done it?" So much like us, man. If you just give me something to do, God, if you give me something hard, I'll do it, And he said, "But how much more should you do it when he tells you to go wash and clean? Something simple, something easy." I think we overcomplicate things, and we get all messed up. And I'm going to pause for just a second because they're cleaning the street here, and it's going to get loud. This is kind of things you happen when you're filming outside. But anyway, I mean, now we got something easy to do, and we're stuck. We don't want to do it. But Nahum listened to his servant. Now, this commander must have wanted to be healed and changed. And so he went down, he dipped himself in the Jordan, and according to the command of the man of God, his skin was restored. And that's an awesome story, right? But what does it say behind that? "And it became like the skin of a small boy, and he was clean." So God not only restored his skin, but he even improved it. And you know what? That's what God wants to do in our lives. He wants us to trust him enough to take him these things, take him the things that we need to give to him, and the problems that we have. And God says, "I'm not only going to solve them for you, I'm not only going to help you with them if you'll learn from me, if you'll get advice from people, if you'll look into my word." He said, "I'm going to make it even better." And so he does that. And then Nahum and his whole company went back to the man, stood before him, and declared, "I know," now listen to this. He says, "I know there is no God in the world except in Israel. Therefore, please accept a gift from your servant." Man, awesome thing that happens here. The transformation, the believing of the heart, the accepting of Yahweh as his God. You have to understand in this particular part, the city-states or the nations had different gods. Sometimes even broken down into territories, sides of towns, this side worshipped one god, this side worshipped another god. And so this is what this thing, actually the god that this man served was Rimmon, and his nation, or his king state, depending on what it was. He was in Damascus, so most likely it was a couple, maybe 3 or 4 towns that made up of this basic nation. It's a little different than what we think. But he says, you know what? There's no other God. There's no other God in the whole world except for the one that lives in Israel. And so he basically, by making that statement, is now giving his life to this God. I mean, and that's what he's doing. And it's an amazing thing. There's the street sweeper again. So he says this to him, and then Naaman responded, because I want to give you these gifts. And the gifts that he brought, the gold, the silver things, and we read here in 16, Elisha says, the Lord lives and stands before him, I will not accept it. You see, Elisha understood something, that the reward was in the man's belief in the man's thing. It wasn't, and now he's a brother. He's not to accept a gift. And I don't know how many times we do that. We ask God to do something for somebody, and we pray for them, say we lay hands on them, and they're healed. A lot of times we want a gift for our faith. Well, and the fact is that we should be even, we should come to the point where we're just enjoying the fact that the healing took place and the restoration took place. And Elisha also understood that this man could not give him the things that he really needs. That can only come from a relationship with his God. And something that we need to learn, I think, from there. And so he goes through this, and he goes, you need to take something. He goes, just take 2 carts of dirt then, which I find interesting. It says in 17, if not, please let 2 loads of dirt be given to your servant, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings or the sacrifice of any other god but Yahweh. You see what he's saying? It's like, I'm not going to participate. I'm changing everything. I'm rearranging my life. And so that's awesome. And really, we would stop there. Probably as a kid in Sunday school, we'd stop where he was healed. And so, isn't God great? But there's more to the story. And he says in verse 18 and 19, and then I'll be done for the day. He says, however, in a particular matter, may the Lord pardon your servant. So he's already thinking. He's thinking, I've got to go back home. But there's a matter that I'm going to need forgiveness for. And I don't know how to handle it. I'm new to this. I don't get it. And it says this. It says, when my master, the king of Aram, goes into the temple of Rimmon to worship, and I, as his right-hand man, bow in the temple of Rimmon. When I bow in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. Amazing. He's sitting here and he's saying, you know what, I've got to go home to my life. I've made this change. I've done these things, this is what I believe, but now I've got to go home and I got to figure it out. I got to figure out this thing in my real life. How does this happen? And really, our English is pretty bad here, our language, because it says as his right-hand man. In other words, if you really read it originally, it says, when I go in the temple, I'm standing there, and I'm not going to bow. He goes, and all of a sudden, my king, is as his right-hand man, he's going to pull me down, and I'm not going to have a choice, and I'm going to have to do this. And I don't understand it. Sometimes there are many of us who come to the saving knowledge of Christ, but we're working in a field maybe that we would think is not sacred, and which gets me on a whole other subject, and we won't even go there. But and so we find ourselves saying, how's God going to love me? How's God going to continue to forgive me? How God is going to do this for me when I've got to go back to the real world? Well, most of the time us Christians would look at this person and he would give this thing of what's going to happen. And we look at this story and goes, man, he's going to go worship a God in another temple, but not in his heart. It's not happening in his heart. He's sitting there going, and we find that most of us, I think, as Christians would say, well, man, you just have to stand. You just got to do this. You don't have a choice. And we'd be hard-nosed and we'd give no grace. And if you go to that place and you do that thing, then guess what? You know what? You're out of luck. You don't have a choice. You're not really saved. We'd make those kind of determinations for somebody. But what does Elisha say to him? He says this, 19, and I end with this. So he said to him, go in peace. The word in the ancient Hebrew is shalom. Go in shalom. It's a complete peace. It's so much than just peace that we would think of today when we think that. And we're not talking about world peace. We're talking inner restoration. We're talking back to what it should have been. Shalom has this feeling of the Garden of Eden. And where we live now, we've been cast out of that but in Revelations 22 or 21 and 22, God comes and lives with us, and he restores all things back to shalom, to this peace, to this restoration, the way it should have been. And he goes, go in this. He doesn't condemn him from what he has to do. He says, I know your heart, I know you've been changed, and therefore go in shalom, go in peace. I hope this touches our hearts today, because the way we deal with people, the way we deal with ourselves, we need to come to a place in our life where we look at people and we say, go in shalom. May God restore you. It may not happen the way we want. We may not be told the way things are, but the way things that we want it to be. But God is in the business of shalom. So may this God go with you. May you experience his shalom in your life. And may we experience a joy for one another and a love for one another that can never be changed. All right, guys. Have a great day. I hope to do this again soon, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.